We're talking about sending military forces to fight against the drug cartels in Latin America. Do you think it's worth sending our forces, our U.S. forces there to take this on?
Cartels where?
Central Latin America.
Well, Latin America's got a lot of cartels. They've got a lot of drugs flowing. So, we want to protect our country. We have to protect our country. We haven't been doing it for 4 years. And we love this country like they love their countries. We have to protect our country. So, we're playing a tough game.
The desert night was quiet, the kind of silence that only the borderlands could produce, broken only by the howl of wind through canyons and the scurry of night creatures under the moon. But hidden in that silence was movement, shadowy figures slipping across the boundary that divided Mexico from the United States. It wasn't just migrants looking for work, nor smugglers with backpacks of drugs. This was something far more dangerous. The Sinaloa Cartel, emboldened and enraged, had staged something that U.S. officials never thought possible: an armed breach of the border, a brazen incursion onto American soil. It began with intelligence whispers. Weeks earlier, DEA agents picked up chatter that factions of the cartel were planning an unprecedented show of strength.
Cartels are now officially in the Pentagon's crosshairs, and it's not just the wall anymore. Trump ordered the kill shot. El Presidente doesn't comprehende. This isn't a Mexican standoff, this is an order. The CIA is already flying surveillance drones over Mexican territory, gathering intel on the battle space. No.
Yes, but it has nothing to do with Mexican territory. It has to do with their country. It does not involve our territory.
So it would be within the United States?
Within the United States, exactly.
With the arrest of key lieutenants and growing U.S. pressure on trafficking routes, the Sinaloa bosses wanted revenge. Not the quiet kind, not assassinations in Mexico City or ambushes on highways. They wanted a spectacle, something that would humiliate Washington and prove to the world that the cartel could reach beyond its own borders. The plan was audacious. Cartel gunmen, heavily armed with military-grade weapons smuggled from corrupt suppliers, would move across the border in the dead of night. Their target was not a town or city, but U.S. Border Patrol installations, symbols of American control. They would strike fast, sow chaos, and retreat before reinforcements arrived. It was designed as psychological warfare to terrify and embarrass the United States. But the cartel underestimated what awaited them. At Fort Bragg and Fort Campbell, silent orders were already moving through secure lines. The breach was detected early thanks to drones circling high over the desert and signals intercepted by U.S. Northern Command. The president had been briefed and authorization came swiftly. This would not be a law enforcement matter. This would not be a DEA raid or a Border Patrol skirmish. America would answer cartel aggression with its most elite warriors. Delta Force was deployed. Alongside them, a battalion of Army Rangers was flown in under cover of darkness. These weren't routine patrols. These were operators trained for high-intensity battlefields, men who had cut their teeth in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. And now their mission was to stop the cartel's incursion cold. The breach began just after midnight. Cartel convoys rolled through dry riverbeds, pickup trucks bristling with mounted machine guns painted in camouflage, engines muffled to a low growl. They carried dozens of sicarios, faces hidden behind balaclavas, weapons slung across their chests. AK-47s, AR-15, even stolen military RPGs. They believed surprise was on their side. They believed America was unprepared. But as their lead vehicle crossed onto U.S. soil, the night erupted in ways they could not have imagined. Overhead, the faint hum of rotors grew into a roar. Blackhawks and little birds swooped in, their silhouettes blotting out the stars. Spotlights flared, bathing the desert in blinding light. The first bursts of gunfire crackled across the night as Delta Force snipers, hidden in ridgelines, opened fire with surgical precision. Within seconds, the convoy's lead truck was a burning wreck, its engine shredded, its crew scattering in panic. The cartel's formation crumbled instantly. Fighters tried to return fire, spraying bullets wildly into the darkness. But the Americans were ghosts. Rangers in night vision gear moved like shadows across the sand, flanking from both sides. Every time a cartel gunman raised his rifle, he was cut down by disciplined, coordinated bursts. Grenades arced through the air, detonating with deafening booms that sent shockwaves across the desert floor. The cartel had walked into an ambush carefully prepared by some of the most lethal forces on Earth. Radio chatter among the invaders turned frantic. Leaders screamed orders in Spanish, trying to regroup. Avancen! No retroceden! But their calls were swallowed by chaos. One attempted to fire an RPG at a ranger position, only to be dropped by a sniper before he could squeeze the trigger. Another tried to flee in a pickup, but a helicopter gunship shredded the vehicle with a torrent of 30mm rounds, leaving nothing but twisted metal and smoke. Delta Force operators moved with ruthless efficiency. They weren't there to arrest, to negotiate, or to intimidate. They were there to eliminate the threat. With each passing minute, the desert battlefield grew more lopsided. The cartel's belief in shock and awe evaporated as they realized they were facing an opponent beyond their comprehension. Some cartel fighters dropped their weapons and tried to surrender. Others ran for the border, desperate to retreat back into Mexico. But the Rangers had sealed every exit. Encircled, the cartel forces found themselves in a kill box, every avenue of escape cut off. The Americans controlled the sky, the ground, and the night itself. By dawn, the battlefield was silent again, but the silence was different. No longer was it the quiet of anticipation. It was the aftermath of destruction. Burned-out trucks smoldered in the sand. Bodies of cartel fighters lay scattered, their weapons abandoned beside them. What was meant to be a show of strength had become a massacre. The Sinaloa Cartel had lost not just men and weapons, but its aura of invincibility. The Pentagon released no official numbers, but insiders later revealed the scale of the operation. Dozens of cartel fighters had been killed. Several high-value lieutenants, men who had orchestrated smuggling networks worth billions, were confirmed dead. U.S. forces suffered minimal casualties thanks to overwhelming superiority in tactics, equipment, and training. The news hit Mexico like a thunderclap. For years, the cartels had operated with impunity, fighting each other, fighting the government, sometimes even fighting among themselves. But to see one of their most powerful organizations crushed on U.S. soil by American Special Forces sent shockwaves through the underworld. Whispered conversations in cartel safehouses were suddenly filled with fear. If the U.S. was willing to unleash Delta Force and Army Rangers across the border, what else might they be willing to do? Washington, meanwhile, made its message clear. The president addressed the nation in somber but firm tones. The United States will never tolerate armed incursions into our territory, he declared. Those who challenge our sovereignty will face the full measure of American resolve. The speech was replayed across the world, a reminder that America's red lines remained firmly in place. But behind the public declarations was unease. For years, the U.S. had treated cartel violence as a law enforcement problem, a matter of policing and interdiction. This breach had changed everything. The cartel had acted like a paramilitary force, and the U.S. had responded in kind. Some lawmakers warned this was the beginning of a new era, where cartels would be treated not as criminals but as insurgents, enemies of the state. The debate raged in Washington, but the soldiers on the ground already knew the truth. The lines had blurred. For the survivors of the raid, the handful of cartel gunmen who managed to slip back across the border, the aftermath was hellish. They returned to Sinaloa not as heroes but as broken men. Their leaders raged at the humiliation, swearing vengeance, but their words rang hollow. The images of burning convoys and defeated fighters spread across encrypted networks. Rivals in Jalisco and Gulf cartels mocked them, calling them weak. For the first time in decades, the mighty Sinaloa name carried the sting of defeat. Yet the cartel is nothing if not resilient. In the weeks that followed, intelligence showed frantic movement in northern Mexico. Weapons stockpiles were shifted. New recruitment drives began, filling training camps with young men desperate for money, revenge, or both. Analysts warned that the raid would not end the threat. It had only pushed the cartel to adapt, to evolve. For the U.S. military, Scarborough and Afghanistan were history, but now a new front had opened, one not across oceans but across a line of sand and wire just a few hours from Texas. Rangers rotated home, but Delta Force remained on standby, their mission parameters quietly rewritten. Future breaches, they knew, would not be met with hesitation. The message had been sent, but whether it had been received was another question entirely. The most shocking part of the story was not the scale of American firepower or the speed of the victory. It was the fact that the breach had happened at all, that the Sinaloa Cartel, drunk on power, had dared to provoke the United States in such a direct military fashion. It was a reminder that the border was not just a line on a map, it was a battlefield, one that could flare without warning. The desert keeps its secrets well. By the time the sun was high in the sky, the wreckage had been cleared, the bodies removed, the sand swept clean by the wind. To an ordinary traveler, the ground looked untouched. But for those who had been there, the operators who pulled triggers, the cartel gunmen who fought for their lives, the officials who watched live feeds in Washington, the memory would never fade. What began as a breach ended as an obliteration. The Sinaloa Cartel had crossed the line, and Delta Force and the Army Rangers had wiped them off the map. It was a story that would echo across both sides of the border. A warning written not in speeches or treaties, but in fire, steel, and blood under the moonlit desert sky.